This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 318 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. Before getting into this week's trends, I wanted to send a reminder about NumberFire Premium. NumberFire Premium can help you become a better bettor. You can get help setting your DFS lineups and much more. And you can get your first month of any of NumberFire's premium packages, which are normally as much as $49.99 for just $9.99 when you sign up today with promo code CHAMPION. That's promo code CHAMPION. Visit numberfire.com/premium for more details. DJ Chark is now tied for the league lead in touchdown receptions with 8. But he leads the NFL in percentage of team touchdowns or receiving touchdown share. He's been on the receiving end of half of Jacksonville's passing touchdowns this year. We've only had 5 seasons since 2011 where a wide receiver ended the year with at least 50% of his team's touchdowns. Devontae Adams and Zay freaking Jones did it last year, Brandon Marshall in 2012, Brandon Lloyd in 2011, and Mike Evans in 2014. Those were the 5 seasons. Like I've said on past 15 transactions shows, though, I think that we should expect some regression from Chark, especially because he's outperforming his yards to touchdowns conversion. It's not like Jacksonville is a high-powered offense, but I've had him as a buy candidate because of that playoff schedule, and the fact that even with regression, DJ Chark is still a beast, especially after seeing a really high target share this past week with Nick Foles back under center. So you guys know that I like looking at yards versus touchdowns to spot regression, or to at least see who's underperforming and overperforming in the touchdown column. I usually do it for running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, but it works for quarterbacks as well. And that brings me to Jared Goff. So far this season, he's thrown 11 touchdowns on 2,784 yards. Based on that yardage total and using the last 5 years worth of data, he should have over 17 touchdowns. He's left 6.3 touchdowns on the table when you go by that average. And you can see this when you're looking at touchdown rate. During his first 2 seasons with Sean McVay, Goff had a 5.9% touchdown rate and a 5.7% touchdown rate. This year, it's all the way down to 2.9%. So technically, Jared Goff's a positive regression candidate, but I still don't like him all that much as a trustworthy fantasy quarterback moving forward. Trend 3 is that Robbie Anderson hasn't hit a target share of 12% in 3 straight games. Meanwhile, Jamison Crowder's target share is over 25% during this time, when it was closer to 20% during the 3 games prior. Crowder's the clear wide receiver that you want in New York given that target share floor. Whereas Anderson, like I talked about on last week's mailbag show, he's going to be hard to predict week in and week out from here on out. Over the Atlanta Falcons' first 8 games of the season, they averaged 0.9 sacks and 3.6 quarterback hits per game. Over their last 2 games, so since their bye week, that sack number has gone from 0.9 to 5.5, and the quarterback hits have gone from 3.6 to 10.5 per game. And this isn't one game skewing those numbers. They've had 6 and 5 sacks over their last 2 contests, and then 11 and 10 quarterback hits in those 2 games as well. Now this may seem like complete randomness, but Dan Quinn evidently handed off all defensive play calling duties to his assistants after their bye week, which was 3 weeks ago. There was reportedly a bit of a transition beforehand, but the Falcons shook it all up at their bye week. Atlanta's not the pushover that they were defensively earlier this year. Trend 5 is that since Emmanuel Sanders left the Broncos, Noah Fant has seen a 27.6%, a 22.2%, and a 29.7% target share in his 3 games played without him. That's an elite target share across 3 weeks. Prior to the Sanders trade, Fant's target share was in the 11 to 12% range. Fant's now ranked as a tight end 15, 2, and 16 over these 3 games. He failed to finish higher than tight end 15 with Emmanuel Sanders in that Broncos lineup. Fant's honestly graduating from being a worthless fantasy asset to a high-end streamer or even a weekly low-end starter in fantasy leagues. It's tough to find that type of target share at tight end. Devontae Parker is the best under-rostered wide receiver in fantasy football, and I don't think it's close. He's somehow still available in 41% of Yahoo leagues, but since week 4, he's averaged 15 PPR points per game. Of all wide receivers with at least 5 games played over this time, that ranks as wide receiver 20 in PPR formats. please add Devontae Parker if he's on your waiver wire. Sammy Watkins was the wide receiver 1 in fantasy football all the way back in week 1. It seems like it was last season. You guys probably remember that game, though, against Jacksonville. Since then, he's averaged a target share in this Kansas City Chiefs offense, one of the best offenses in football, of about 18%. Even with that target share, he's failed to finish as a wide receiver 2 or a top 24 wide receiver, and he's ranked as a wide receiver 38 or worse in all but one game. He's like the opposite of Devontae Parker, where he's rostered in a lot of leagues. He's rostered in 81% of Yahoo leagues, but he's not producing at all. Trend 8 this week is that Christian Kirk has seen a near 27% target share since returning from his injury. He's seeing elite usage, and that's actually generally been the case all year long. Even when you include the beginning of the season, his target share in games played is close to 25%. You can play him each week no matter the matchup as a result. When adjusted for strength of opponent, no team has allowed more fantasy points per game above expectation to opposing quarterbacks than the Arizona Cardinals. Enemy quarterbacks are scoring 6.2 more fantasy points per game against Arizona versus their season-long averages. And if you dig into it, it makes sense. We saw Jimmy G go nuts in his 2 games against them. Drew Brees was the QB4. Matt Ryan, the QB1 in weekly scoring. Kyle Allen back in week 3 was the QB6. Stafford in week 1, the QB4. Arizona's a matchup to exploit, and they're a reason to hold on to Baker Mayfield down the stretch here. Not only does Mayfield get Miami this week, but he gets Arizona in week 15, the fantasy football playoffs. The final trend this week is a little less of a trend and a little more of, I really want to talk about this thing, so I'm going to force it into this 10 trend show. I hope you guys don't care. But I guess the trend is that Patrick Mahomes currently has a 5.9% touchdown rate when his touchdown rate last year was 8.6%. I mentioned this on Twitter on Tuesday, and there were some responses that talked about his injury, that talked about Tyreek Hill's injury. There were a lot of excuses being made for Patrick Mahomes. But we don't really need excuses here, you guys. Saying that Patrick Mahomes has a lower touchdown rate is not me saying that Patrick Mahomes is playing worse football. It's me making note that touchdowns are volatile. And we should never have projected Patrick Mahomes to have a similar touchdown rate as he had last year. Because here's the thing. Even though things haven't been as clean and perfect as they were last year for Mahomes, his yards per attempt is 8.7 this year versus 8.8 last year. He's actually got a better adjusted net yards per attempt rate. His yards per game is 312 versus 318. The list goes on and on. Patrick Mahomes in every category that's not touchdowns, and I guess interceptions too, at this point through week 11 has been just as good this year as last year. The difference is that he's not throwing touchdowns at as high of a rate because it was going to be really, really hard for him to throw at the same rate as last year, no matter what happened. This is what happens with touchdowns. It's why Tyler Lockett's not scoring at the same rate as last year. It's why Mike Williams also isn't scoring at the same rate. It's a combination of how teams score touchdowns, so pass to rush touchdown ratio, to go along with how frequently they score them. And Kansas City as a team was a clear negative regression candidate heading into the season. I talked about it a lot during the offseason on this show. That doesn't mean they'd have a bad season offensively. It meant that they'd likely not maintain a 40.5% touchdown rate per drive. When someone or some team does something really well, it makes doing that thing again or repeating that thing really hard. Maybe it's because the team changed personnel because they couldn't afford to keep the team together. Maybe it's because the team was healthy in one season and didn't have that type of injury luck the following year. Maybe it's because the team started running for more touchdowns instead of throwing for them. Or maybe things just kind of went their way one season with scoring and some of those breaks didn't happen the following year. Regression hit Patrick Mahomes, but he's still Patrick Mahomes, and he's still arguably the best quarterback in football. But regression, from a fantasy perspective, because touchdowns drive fantasy, regression has hit through 11 weeks. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you tomorrow with the weekly matchup show.